It's better not to have an introduction that forces you to disappoint. I'm going to go through something we went through before in one of the sessions. And in order to understand about why it's important to discern spirits and to discern where God is leading us, is because there's been a radical change in the teaching of Jesus from the teaching of the Jewish system. Under the Jewish system, you don't need to know a lot about choices because you're told what not to do. So we have this, this is bad, this is good. Doesn't require a genius to figure that out. But when we talk about the discernment of goods, we're talking about which of two goods. Neither one of them is bad. But the choices you make in your life, where God's leading you, how he's taking you, this is always how to choose between goods. And anyway, I'd like to sort of give this text from Mark, and then talk on it. I should mention the text also appears in Luke exactly the same way. So the discussion begins with Jesus and his apostles are not overly disciplined from the point of view of the people around. So they want to know, why is it the Pharisees and the people who follow John the Baptizer and all this sort of stuff, why they fast and the people following Jesus don't? And so they're going through this kind of discussion. And this is Jesus' answer. He says, no person sews a piece of unshrunken cloth onto an old cloak. Otherwise, the patch pulls away from it, the new from the old, and there is a worse tear. And nobody puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and the skins as well. New wine into fresh skins. Okay? Basically, about the things he's using, this, I think you know that material tends to shrink. And so if you try and put a brand new piece of material on an old cloth, it will shrink and tear it apart. Understand the power is in the new, not in the old. It's because the new does it. And the same with wineskins. I think many of you may have been acquainted with these Boda bags for having wine. Today they line them with plastic so you can use them over and over and over, as I'm sure you discovered. But anyway, in the ancient world, that wasn't true. They had them filled with the wine, and they would age it like you do in barrels. And you probably know that wine is a living substance, so it expands and contracts and this sort of thing. That's all great with new leather. And then after you finish, I'm sure all of you at one time or another have dried a pair of leather shoes in front of a furnace or something, and you practically crack them putting them on. Well, you can never put wine into a wineskin that's dried because it will crack and explode. What Jesus is trying to do is to get us as believers not to put his teaching into the categories of the Old Testament. It's a new teaching and it demands a new structure, okay? And the difference in the Old Testament structure and the New Testament structure is the Old Testament structure is a prohibition of sin. Like if I could pick one phrase that would define morality in the Jewish scriptures, it's thou shalt not. Okay? That defines it. You will hear that over and over and over in the Jewish scriptures. Jesus doesn't do that. With Jesus, we have blessed are. So then we talk about meekness, we talk about all these kinds of virtues. People instinctively love the prohibitions. And first of all, the prohibitions can be fulfilled. So like, for instance, we would hear a prohibition from God, thou shalt not kill, okay? And I would like you to notice that's really a bad translation, because the word is murder. It's not kill. It would not prohibit your killing animals, nor does it prohibit your executing a guilty person, okay? But what it prohibits is murder. And I think probably most of us can stand before God and say we never committed murder. That comes up at Last Judgment, where most of us are home safe, okay? Would to God that's the only thing that can. Anyway, so once we're up there, if you look at the teaching of Jesus, what does he say? He says, you shall love your neighbor. Well, what exactly is that? Well, if you get in a fight, you're supposed to forgive your neighbor. Now, what exactly is that? Well, it means, first of all, I'm never going to get even. But does it mean you have to make friends with the person again? Does it mean you have to be involved with the person as a friend? Does it mean you have to be willing to sacrifice your life? And you can go on like this forever. I don't know if many of you know the dying words of Francis of Assisi. Francis of Assisi, was dedicated to poverty. And so when he was dying, now imagine he's a dying man. He required the people around him to take off all of his clothes, and he required to take him outside. So he had nothing and was in nothing. And he died, and his last words were, God be merciful to me, the greatest of sinners. Well, he was thinking in New Testament terms. If you're thinking in New Testament terms, Jesus commands us to love people. I have never loved anyone where I couldn't have loved them more. So I'll never be able to stand before Jesus and say, I've done it. Murder, I'm in. Loving people, forgiving people, you can never, ever get there. It's kind of like the donkey and the carrot, You follow the carrot, you will never get the carrot. But the interesting thing is, in pursuing these, you will become a saint. You'll never accomplish any one of them. You have to be at peace with that. But pursuing them is what makes you a saint. You pursue these and you grow in all kinds of ways. One of the reasons why we like the prohibitions, it's easy to pick out a person who has committed murder, for instance, and it's easy to condemn them. It's easy to see people who break the commandments. It's easy to see people who curse. It's easy to say, I'd go through a whole list of them. But the thing is, we're able to see them and condemn them. And one of the great ways of appearing to be holy is condemning people. So rather than striving to be perfect in the mind of God, I just try and hang out with a bunch of really weak sinners, okay? Then I look marvelous. I really do. I shine, as you notice here. But you end up doing that. And because of that, it is a treasure, people's ability to condemn people. It is actually a treasure. And you notice that it multiplied in societies where people will be condemned for their color, their intelligence, their height. I go through the whole thing. You can find something to condemn everyone for. And so this ability to condemn becomes a treasure. And people do not like to give it up. I'd like you to notice we as a church have never given it up. If I were to ask Jesus, how often should I pray? I think Jesus says pray always. Appears several times in the scriptures. You pray always, okay? Can anyone do that? No. Become a saint trying, but you can't do it. But what does the Catholic Church tell me? Catholic Church tells me go to Mass on Sunday, or you're in mortal sin. You see how you put it into the old category? It should be an invitation for people to attend Mass every day. And then let them try it, you know? And in pursuing it, who's going to miss a Sunday Mass? We need to mentally make the change. I want you to notice it. The institution has not made the change. Well, it is so difficult. People do not like to give up the ability to actually tell when someone else is wrong. The Jewish system is the ideal system if you want to point out people are wrong. The Christian system is the ideal system if you want to become a saint. And Jesus is not the least bit interested in us avoiding doing wrong. He is interested in us being saints, okay? And another thing I like to point out, the absolute perfect observer of the 10 Commandments is a redwood tree. Never kills anyone, never swears. You go through the whole thing. But you know, a redwood could never be compared to the Beatitudes. None of the things in the Beatitudes can the redwood do. And we are called to be more than redwoods. We are called to be before the Lord in this kind of perfection. In order to do this, we need to, first of all, move ourselves away from the concept of sin, okay? I think probably in the concept that you see in, I think, you know, like in raising a child. I'll use this example. When you're raising a child, you want your child to know enough about sex in order to be safe. You want your children to be safe and know enough about sex to do that. And because of that, you will moderate the amount of material you give the child according to age, because you never want to interest them in something they have never yet thought about, okay? Sex is a very delicate thing, so you want them to be safe, but not curious, okay? So you sort of move along in this way. And sin works that way in our lives. If we have a morality that is based on sin, sin invites us. And that's what you notice in Genesis. In Genesis, which is the prototypical sin. It is the very first sin in the Bible. The Bible, the first time anything occurs, it is what is called prototypical. It will somehow moderate all of it through all of history. So, what happens? God creates the Garden of Eden, brings in Adam and Eve, and shows them the garden and this sort of thing, and asks them not to eat off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so Satan, in the form of the snake, and I think I've mentioned this before, it's not really a snake. The word is reptile. And I think you know the 10 Commandments were composed when the Jews were in Sinai during the Exodus. And the reptile they were most horrified with was the Nile crocodile. And that's because the Nile crocodile was, number one, a god in Egypt. And number two, that's what they fed the baby boys to. That's why Moses was put in the river. Okay? So baby boys were fed to the crocodiles. So anyway, this is crocodile. And the crocodile comes up to Eve and says, I understand God has told you that you may not eat of the fruit of this tree, and you may not even touch it. I'd like you to notice, first of all, Satan's lying. God never said, don't touch it. He never said that. But he said not to eat the fruit. And then Eve is immediately alerted to that tree, okay? St. Jerome was the very first guy to translate the Bible into the vernacular. He translated to Latin. But he maintains in his commentaries, He said, maybe if God had never told them not to eat from that tree, they might not even have ever found it. There might have been no sin at all. But as soon as the prohibition is there, the whole rest of the book deals with that tree. And if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, you know that in the garden there are actually two trees. There's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. They never approached the tree of life. They approached only the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and only because they were told to stay away from it. Okay? So this living a life of prohibitions, or studying prohibitions, contains within itself the invitation into the prohibition. Oftentimes, when we're told not to do things, we discover things that we would never have discovered, before. My parents were apostles of this kind of as a child. My dad, for a while, managed a liquor store. And one of the things he thought he noticed in the liquor store is that there seemed to be very few Jewish alcoholics, okay? Now, I have no idea whether this is true or not. But anyway, in his liquor store, there seemed to be very, very few Jewish alcoholics. And he interpreted that because Jewish children had wine at their meals. And in my household, my mother smoked. My father did, but not while I was alive. He had given up smoking by that time. But anyway, my mother never pulled out a cigarette where she didn't offer me one. I never smoked in my entire life, okay? But she never pulled out a cigarette where she didn't offer me one. My parents used to have a martini every evening before dinner, and they offered me a martini in a shot glass, and I don't think I tasted anything like it till in my college years I was siphoning gas out of cars. But until then, I never tasted anything like it at all. But bourbon's another thing. But anyway, the martini thing was a deal. But my parents were very, very careful about not ever denying anything to us that they were doing, because they thought that would be an invitation into these things. And it may or may not have been, I don't know. No one in my family's alcoholic, but people in general drink, and smoking's kind of disappeared now pretty well. But anyway, this idea of not working on the prohibition. I'd also tell you that one of the things, I don't know if you've ever studied anything about this, but I took a course in photography. They mentioned I have a learning disability. My learning disability is dyslexia, so I almost cannot read. So that in college, anytime I had an opportunity to take a choice between courses, it always had to do with how much reading was involved. I have a minor in art history, just so I could get in things where you looked at pictures rather than things. But in this this idea of the dyslexia, you would watch and learn things, and I could learn things by things I touched and that sort of thing. But the reading was really a bad thing. And in the community, we are called then to be people who look for the positive call we have from God. And the positive call, of course, ultimately is to holiness. But our call to what we're supposed to be doing is very, very individual. And it's, I don't know if many of you have done it, but I would encourage you to read the lives of saints. One of the reasons is they all attain a level of holiness that's unbelievable, and no two of them are exactly the same. They're very, very different in the talents or weaknesses they bring, and very, very different in what they pursue and how they go about it. And we want to be people who are open to this call that comes where God invites us into different things. Probably one of the big people with regards to all of this is Ignatius of Loyola. Ignatius of Loyola founded the Jesuits. No one's perfect. And as the thing that you may know or may not know, the big book in Alcoholics Anonymous is written from Ignatius's book, The Discernment of Spirits, referring to evil spirits, not the alcohol. But anyway, the thing that his first experience of this, he loved novels that dealt with heraldry and knights and jousting and all that sort of stuff. He really loved that kind of reading. And when he got into the hospital, which of course was run by nuns at that time, the only books available were Lives of Saints and Bibles, okay? So I guess it was nuns and Gideons. But anyway, those were the only things that were available to him. So he would read the Lives of Saints. And one of the things he noticed was when he read the lives of these knights and armors and what do you call it, kings and queens and this sort of thing, he really enjoyed it. It was very relaxing for him. But when it was over, it was over. And he'd go back to the book later. However, he found when he read the lives of the saints, imagining the things that they took over and how powerful they had been in these different things, he said it would go over in his mind, he'd enjoy it for days afterwards. And he came to understand that God wanted him in that line of reading rather than the heraldry. And so he went in that line of reading, and then he could go on with his life and that sort of thing. But one of the things that God will lead us is by what we enjoy. And when, like people are all very, very different. There's a woman, I can't think of her name right now, but she's a poet in England, and she's deceased now. She never once got out of her sickbed. She was a very messed up person physically. And when she was dying, the priest who was attending her was explaining to her how wonderful it will be for her to be free of that body and have, the spirit that she would in heaven. But her response to the priest was, the reason why my poetry is so popular is because I understand the suffering of Jesus. Her poetry was all religious. And she said, had I not had to live in this state, I would never understand his suffering. But because I do, I became the person I was and became the artist, the poet, famous poet in England about this sort of thing. And I remember, this is a quote I'm sure many of you heard. It's a famous one from Benjamin Franklin. But he's referring to the business of earning a living. And he said, find a way to survive. Notice he uses the word survive. Find a way to survive doing what you enjoy, and you will never work a day in your entire life. Okay? Spirituality is that way too. There are things that people enjoy, and there are things, that people don't. And it's very interesting in the parish that you'll have a gathering of people, and there's some people who really have a very good, comfortable job and really enjoy supporting the care of the poor. There's some people who really enjoy being able to serve the food to the poor and help them with the things. There are all kinds of things. But the idea in virtue is to find out what you enjoy doing, okay? It's like we had a priest in the seminary who was from Austria. And one of the things one Lent, I think it was the first, just before Ash Wednesday or something, the rector of the seminary gave us a long talk on the idea of the penances we were supposed to do for Lent. And he said, if you're a person who enjoys reading like Lives of Saints and stuff like that, you should confine yourself to the reading you need for the classes and should in fact give that up for Lent. If you really enjoy desserts, don't eat any desserts for Lent. But he basically developed this thing that God is most pleased by how miserable I am, okay? So if I can make myself just really awful, he's delighted, okay? But now if you postulate that model, the real question is, would you really want to spend eternity with that person? And the answer is no. I want to spend my eternity with someone who wants to see me insanely happy. That's the one I want to spend eternity with. But see, God's about that in our lives. He wants us to have happy lives. And I would encourage you, if you're looking for good to do, find the good you enjoy doing. And I think all of you know people who've done that. It eventually enslaves them. They are eventually enslaved to what they enjoy doing. And they will do it over and over and over. I have priests come up to me all the time and they say, you are the busiest priest in the entire diocese and you're supposed to be retired. I tell them being retired is supposed to be doing what you enjoy doing. I just have been lucky to do it my whole life, you know? I fell into it early. But this idea of knowing that's what God's about. God is about my happiness here and there. And so he would call me to do things that really will build my happiness and my joy while simultaneously building the kingdom. Because there's all kinds of jobs in building the kingdom, you know? Like when we come together for something like this, you know, there are people whose sole job is to keep the room clean and arrange the chairs. Well, I know people who really enjoy that sort of stuff. We have some people in the parish who, I think they live in their minds, and so they enjoy doing very routine things. You may or may not know this, but Albert Einstein was that way. Albert Einstein always wanted to do something totally routine because it's his mind that he wanted going. So he would be the type of person who would do all these crazy jobs like working in the, the patent office and stuff like that, because he just had to deal with these silly things. But he was able to do this because the whole thing was in his mind. And I know people who really enjoy setting up a room and decorating the altar because it's an art thing to them. They see it, you know, everything. And, you know, to me, that's not a big deal. But to them, it's actually a work of art. And if you see someone who knows what they're doing, you'd agree. It is indeed a work of art. When people see it done, there's all kinds of things. And every single thing is to look at to build the kingdom of God. The final thing I will mention in this is that in order to understand this, you have to try to do a lot of things. And one of the reasons is what you most enjoy may indeed be something that would never occur to you. And I'll give you one example that is agreed on by all psychologists. The most terrifying thing that any person does voluntarily is to get up in front of a group and speak. That is absolutely terrifying to everyone initially. It's just that some of us get up reluctantly and decide we like it. But no one would get up at all if you weren't forced one way or another. That is absolutely terrifying. So one of the things in human life is to learn to try different things. And you try it. If you don't like it, don't be an idiot. Give it up. Okay? Walk away from it. And I say to do that for two reasons. One reason, if you don't enjoy it, it is someone's job who will enjoy it. So get out of the way. And you need to find the job that you enjoy. To the degree each one of us is doing what we enjoy, the church works like a well-oiled machine. And you realize over a period of time that God has called everyone to do something. And they're all different things. But only you, ultimately, will know what God has called you to do. And you have to try different things, find out what you enjoy, build your life in that area, and grow. It's not unusual for a person to do that and change. Okay? There's a couple of saints. Mary Ann, the one we're celebrating today. Mary Ann was a very, very organized woman in the things she was doing. And she was very necessary to her community because of the way she was doing all these things. And she realized, I don't know how she even came to, Syracuse. Where would they find out about Molokai anyway? But anyway, she found out about what was going on in Molokai and realized what they needed was an organizer. And that was her skill. And she decided to spend the rest of her life as a missionary on Molokai. And so she spent her life basically as a missionary, but using her skills with regards to organizing on the island. And in science, I think that people who are, let's say in scripture study like I do, it's amazing that most of the people who go into scripture study begin as very thirsty people studying scripture, but they end up teachers. They almost all end up teachers. But it begins as someone who enjoys studying it, enjoys learning about it, this sort of thing. But ultimately, that's the door to being a teacher in Scripture. And if you study about careers in the seminary, we learn a lot about that. You probably know anyone who's been a Catholic for any length of time will know that you find different expertise in priests. Like we have in fact, he's replacing me at the parish this weekend. It's hard to describe him, but well, I'll give you an example. One day he was doing a mass at the parish, and his mass was at noon, and it was 12:15, and he was out in front of the church greeting people. So I went out to kind of engage him, and his response to me was, "You don't expect me to start on time, do you?" I said, "Yes." But anyway, so do you know he's one of the most popular priests in the diocese? And that's because he is an extremely kind man. And if you need him at any moment of the day or night, you've got him. Who cares if he shows up on time for Mass? If he shows up when I need to be anointed in the hospital, you know? He's a very, very popular priest. And my experience of priests, the way to be a popular priest is simply be nice. If you arrive at a parish, people automatically like you because you're a priest. But there are priests who manage to turn whole congregations against themselves in no time at all, But this idea of understanding someone who goes into the priesthood have all kinds of different expertise. And I've found most of them, if they pursue their expertise, are very, very popular. And whatever it may be, we have one at a parish that I was at in Spreckles, California, right outside Salinas. The pastor there bakes. He loves to bake. When he goes into a parish, a lot of times you renovate the school. He always puts in a confectioner's oven. That's the first thing. You can tell he's arrived, okay? Confectioner's oven. And he'll do pies and stuff for fellowship and stuff like that. He gives you pies on your birthday and this sort of thing. He couldn't preach his way out of a paper bag, And you watch these things. He's amazingly popular. But priesthood is a very good example of that, because being a priest, in spite of how it looks, doesn't take all your time. There are priests who are very organized, and the organization will take their time. They can do that. There are priests who teach, and then the teaching will take their time. But the idea is it's all different gifts. And I think the priesthood is a good example of that for all of human life. And it's because as a priest, you get to pursue what you're interested in. If you go to a parish, you're interested in teaching, you can teach. If you're interested in organizations, you can lead organizations. You can do all kinds of things as a priest. And so we're one, what do you want to call it? One profession where you can find whatever you're good at and do it. But anyway, basically to sum up, we do not want to try and take the teachings of Jesus and turn it into prohibitions. Jesus never taught, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing. That is not Christianity. And I will tell you, as a youngster, that's what I got from the pulpit all the time, was you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't do the other thing. And that's very, very popular among religious people, okay? That's why you see so much concentration on demons and stuff in the world today, that this whole idea of the prohibition of what's wrong. And so what we want to do is be a people that look towards what's right, lest evil be inviting to us. And to test in our own lives, not only what's right, what is the best right for us? Like, what is the right, good thing that I most enjoy doing? And to allow myself into that, and it ultimately will take you over. You will ultimately be seduced by it. And some of them are just amazing. Like, you look at Mother Teresa. I would say, Mother Teresa, I saw her on 2 occasions. I would say she was one of the happiest people I've ever seen in my entire life. I couldn't live 2 minutes of that life. I could no way practice that life at all. But that's because that was for her. It makes her insanely happy. So in conclusion, we want to be people who, number one, look for the good, not the evil. We want to look for the good in others and compliment them. There's a big thing in a community when you do something well and people compliment you on it. That's a big thing in a community. We have anyone in the community who's doing anything well, compliment them. And that draws them more into it. So we want to compliment people on things they do good, and we want to find the thing that we most enjoy doing. If you most enjoy doing it, you're going to get good because you're going to do a lot of it. Whatever it is you enjoy, you'll ultimately become very good at because you get to do a lot of it. Okay? That's essentially what I wanted as the foundation when we go through looking at the discernment of spirits and why we're doing it. Are there any questions in this? Answers, admonitions, or rebuttals? Go ahead.
I'd be curious on your definition of discernment.
Definition of?
Discernment.
Uh-huh.
How do you define discernment?
Discernment, by definition, is choice. You discern between 2 things. Like when you have dinner, you don't think of it. But when you go down, you're discerning, do I like this? Do I like this? Would I rather have this and skip that? Do I want to fill up on this before the ice cream arrives? That sort of thing. But that's discernment. We, as human beings, you spend your entire day discerning. Do I want to go to my room? Do I want to read the book? Do I want to walk here? Do I want to take a nap? Discernment is a daily activity for everyone. But we do it without noticing, And we can train ourselves to notice that this is a real choice, Like I notice sometimes you hear from people who are really suffering from boredom. And the main thing you do in counseling people about that is that they're the ones who've chosen what bores them. That's how you get bored. You, for whatever, I think this is the best thing for me, but I hate it. I say, skip it, The doctor says, I had to babysit an old man. He had, Alzheimer's. And he had about a month to live. And his wife had to go back to Austria to settle affairs. So I was babysitting the guy. And the doctor told me, he says, he's a very serious alcoholic. And he will go into the refrigerator in the evening and steal wine. Says, he can have a glass of wine at meal, but you never give him, wine. He'll go into the kitchen and steal it. He says, the most important thing for you to know is he's dying, okay? So don't stop him from stealing the wine, because he enjoys stealing the wine. Don't let him know he's stealing the wine. And stay away from it, okay? And I thought the doctor was a genius, I had a dog, the white dog I used to bring up here, and he hurt himself and had to be put down when I was in Washington. But it was interesting, I have an adopted son, and my adopted son came with me when the dog was to be put down. And the vet came in and offered my dog a chocolate, which of course was drugged to put the dog to sleep. So he offers my dog a chocolate, and my son looks at him and says, "Isn't chocolate bad for dogs?" The vet and I just looked at him. Anyway, but this whole idea of being aware that everything is choices all the time. Go ahead.
You said morality is not based on sin. Could you, at least that's what I wrote.
I said you shouldn't teach or learn a morality based on sin. Like you don't want to learn what not to do. You want to learn what to do. Okay? And so, but in the past, in Judaism, and oftentimes I find in Catholicism, it's based on prohibitions. Okay? But if you can get people into doing the good, like for instance, if you're trying to love your neighbor, if you never reach a point, where you're perfection of loving neighbor, you are so far from killing your neighbor that you're safe. Okay? You don't really need to know the commandments if you're in any way pursuing the Beatitudes. Okay? Anyone else?
I think I'd like to say something.
Good.
So when you're speaking about these things, I think a lot of us think about the good that we do in like the practice of the Catholic faith.
The different what?
Like what we're doing in the practice of Catholic faith,
Mm-hmm.
but also what we're talking about, the things we choose to be good at, it could be our works as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just generally what we do as our jobs. And I'm just trying to validate my thought process with this. If I'm doing that in a good way and helping people through work,
Mm-hmm.
then that is making me a good Catholic as well. It's not so much what I'm doing in the capacity of the church, it's what I'm doing.
Oh yeah, it's not really, I'm not talking about it as a church thing. That, if you're a doctor, you're helping people, this sort of thing, but it has to be a good, okay? And like if you were to take artists, a lot of artists spend very private lives. They're very uninvolved with people and everything. But what they're doing is contributing to beauty in the world. That's a good, okay? Can't be faulted. Okay, anyone else? I wish I could develop a way envelopes and Sunday collections are good, but I'm working on it. Thank you very much.